You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Cloud forensics extends traditional digital forensics into environments where customers do not control the underlying infrastructure. The purpose of this discipline is to acquire and analyze digital evidence in a way that preserves its integrity, admissibility, and investigative value. Unlike on-premises systems where investigators can physically seize devices, cloud investigations rely on provider APIs, exported telemetry, and snapshots of virtualized resources. This shift introduces both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, cloud platforms can deliver precise, tamper-evident logs and point-in-time snapshots almost instantly. On the other, investigators must operate within the limits of service agreements, shared responsibility models, and privacy regulations. Cloud forensics requires a balance. Gather enough evidence to support investigations and legal action, but avoid overcollection that may violate contracts or laws. Digital forensics itself follows a well-defined life cycle: collection, preservation, examination, and presentation. Collection is the disciplined gathering of relevant evidence while minimizing disturbance of the source. Preservation ensures that evidence is protected against alteration or loss, often through isolation and hashing. Examination involves analyzing artifacts such as logs, memory, and binaries to reconstruct actions and identify anomalies. Presentation is the communication of findings in a structured, defensible format, often for legal or regulatory proceedings. Each phase must follow documented procedures to ensure credibility. In cloud forensics, this life cycle must adapt to distributed, ephemeral resources, requiring creative use of provider APIs, automation, and forensic tools designed for virtualized infrastructure rather than physical devices. Legal authority and scope are critical in defining what evidence may be collected during a cloud investigation. Investigators must respect the boundaries of contracts, laws, and regulations governing the environment. For example, evidence collection in a public cloud must avoid touching multi-tenant provider internals, as doing so could compromise other customers' data and breach legal obligations. Jurisdictional issues further complicate matters, since data may reside in regions with varying privacy laws. Defining scope also means clarifying who is authorized to perform forensic actions, who may access the evidence, and how it will be stored. Without clear legal authority, evidence may be challenged in court, undermining its value. Cloud forensics therefore requires close collaboration between investigators, legal counsel, and cloud providers. The concept of the order of volatility remains central to cloud forensics. Evidence has varying lifespans, with some artifacts disappearing almost immediately if not captured. Volatile data includes process state, active network connections, and encryption keys in memory. These must be collected first when access is possible. Semi-volatile data includes logs with limited retention periods or ephemeral containers that may be destroyed when terminated. Persistent data, such as block storage volumes or object stores, lasts longer and can be collected later. Following the order of volatility ensures that the most fleeting evidence is not lost. In cloud settings, automation helps capture volatile artifacts quickly, as manual steps often lag behind the speed of ephemeral workloads. Accurate time synchronization underpins the credibility of forensic timelines. Investigators rely on timestamps across logs, snapshots, and traces to reconstruct sequences of events. If clocks drift, it becomes impossible to prove causality, such as whether a login preceded a data exfiltration. Cloud providers typically synchronize infrastructure using Network Time Protocol (NTP), but customers must also ensure that their workloads use consistent time sources. Forensic procedures should validate time alignment during evidence acquisition, documenting offsets where necessary. Without synchronized time, even high-quality evidence may be misinterpreted, weakening investigations and legal arguments. Time accuracy is therefore a foundational requirement of any forensic readiness program in the cloud. Chain of custody is the documented trail of evidence handling, ensuring that every action on collected artifacts is recorded and attributable. It begins when evidence is identified and continues through collection, transfer, analysis, and storage. Each handoff is logged with time, date, handler, and reason. In cloud forensics, chain of custody often includes automated attestations from providers when generating snapshots or exporting logs, providing tamper-evident proof of authenticity. Maintaining this chain is essential for admissibility in court and credibility in audits. A broken or incomplete chain may render evidence useless, regardless of its technical value. Thus, chain of custody is as much about procedural rigor as it is about technical controls. Hashing provides the technical assurance of evidence integrity. Cryptographic digests such as SA-256 are computed on artifacts at the moment of acquisition. These hashes are then stored alongside the evidence, often in tamper-evident logs. Any later modification, even a single bit, produces a different digest, signaling alteration. For example, a disk snapshot exported from a provider can be hashed at creation and verified again before analysis. This process reassures courts, regulators, and investigators that the artifact remains unchanged. Hashing not only protects evidence integrity, but also supports secure deduplication, ensuring investigators work with authentic copies. In cloud forensics, hashing must be applied consistently across logs, images, and memory captures. Control plane artifacts form one of the richest evidence sources in cloud environments. These logs record administrative API calls such as identity creation, policy updates, and network configuration changes. They capture who did what, when, and from where, providing a detailed audit trail of potential attacker or insider actions. For instance, a sudden creation of a high-privilege role, followed by mass storage access, would appear clearly in control plane logs. Because they are generated by the provider, these artifacts often come with built-in integrity assurances. However, investigators must configure logging correctly in advance, since gaps in collection can create blind spots. Control plane evidence is essential for attributing intent and sequencing actions. Data plane artifacts complement control plane evidence by capturing operational activity within cloud services. Storage access logs reveal who read or wrote specific objects. Network flow logs track traffic patterns, and transaction records expose usage of APIs and databases. For example, an unusual spike in outbound traffic correlated with data plane logs may indicate exfiltration. These artifacts highlight how resources were used rather than just how they were configured. They are particularly useful for determining the scope of impact, such as which files were copied or which queries executed. Data plane evidence rounds out investigations by showing the attacker's footprint on actual workloads and data. Snapshot acquisition is a common technique in cloud forensics for preserving point-in-time states of resources. Providers allow investigators to capture block storage volumes, machine images, or object sets without disrupting live systems. These snapshots serve as immutable evidence while production systems continue running. For instance, an EBS volume snapshot in AWS can be hashed, stored, and later mounted for forensic examination. Snapshots balance preservation with business continuity, but investigators must document when and how they were taken to ensure credibility. They are less invasive than physical disk seizures, yet provide equivalent evidentiary value when properly handled. Memory acquisition captures the most volatile but often most revealing evidence: running processes, encryption keys, and network connections. In cloud environments, access to raw memory varies by provider and service model. Infrastructure as a service may allow traditional tools inside virtual machines, while serverless and platform as a service offerings rarely expose memory directly. Policies and legal agreements also limit when and how memory can be captured. When possible, memory acquisition reveals active malware, command and control channels, and credentials in use. Because memory changes constantly, it must be collected carefully and as early as possible in the investigation. Memory captures are invaluable but often constrained in cloud contexts. Container forensics adds unique considerations, given the layered structure of images and the ephemeral nature of workloads. Investigators must examine base images, applied layers, and runtime overlays to identify malicious modifications. Orchestrator metadata, such as Kubernetes audit logs, provides context about pod creation, scaling, and networking. For example, forensic analysis might uncover a malicious binary added into a running container that did not exist in the base image. Capturing and analyzing container states requires coordination with orchestration tools and often specialized forensic utilities. Because containers can spin up and down rapidly, readiness planning is critical to preserve evidence before it disappears. Serverless forensics focuses on short-lived functions triggered by events, making them challenging to investigate. Evidence sources include invocation logs, environment variables, and code package provenance. For example, logs may reveal that a function was invoked thousands of times in rapid succession, suggesting abuse for crypto mining. Environment variables may contain credentials or configuration data used at runtime. Provenance checks confirm whether deployed function code matches approved builds or has been tampered with. Investigating serverless workloads often relies more heavily on provider telemetry than direct access, requiring strong logging practices and proactive design for forensic readiness. Isolation procedures prevent further changes to systems under investigation. In the cloud, this may involve restricting network access, freezing lifecycle actions, or quarantining resources. For example, placing a virtual machine in an isolated subnet ensures no further communication while snapshots are taken. Isolation is tricky in production environments since overly broad measures can disrupt business. Forensic playbooks must define precise, reversible isolation steps that protect evidence while minimizing collateral impact. These controls ensure that once an incident is identified, investigators can freeze the scene much as they would in a physical crime scene, without irreparably damaging evidence. Multi-tenant considerations are unique to cloud forensics. Investigators cannot access underlying provider infrastructure because it is shared across customers. Instead, they must rely on customer-visible artifacts such as logs, snapshots, and exports, along with attestations provided by the provider. For example, forensic analysis cannot involve seizing a physical disk, but it can rely on provider-issued evidence of virtual volume integrity. This constraint means cloud forensics requires cooperation with providers, contractual clarity, and reliance on the provider's controls. Multi-tenancy makes forensics less about seizing hardware and more about validating trust in provider-managed evidence pipelines. Privacy constraints shape every forensic investigation. Collecting more data than necessary risks violating laws such as GDPR or HIPAA, as well as damaging trust with customers. Forensic processes must follow data minimization principles, gathering only what is directly relevant to the case. For example, investigators might collect access logs showing account activity without exporting full object contents if those are unnecessary for scope determination. Collected evidence must also be safeguarded, with redaction applied where feasible to protect personal identifiers. By respecting privacy, investigators maintain both legal compliance and ethical standards, preserving confidence in forensic outcomes. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Agentless collection is one of the defining methods in cloud forensics because it leverages provider-native capabilities rather than installing additional software. Through APIs, responders can request snapshots of virtual disks, exports of audit logs, or archived object copies, all without modifying the live system. This minimizes the forensic footprint, ensuring that evidence remains pristine. For instance, exporting CloudTrail or equivalent logs directly from the provider guarantees integrity because the records are generated outside of the customer's control. Agentless methods are especially useful for environments where installing tools is prohibited or disruptive. However, they require prior planning, as permissions and processes must be established before incidents occur. Done properly, agentless collection supports credibility by using trusted provider attestations and reducing opportunities for evidence contamination. Agent-based collection remains necessary in some scenarios, particularly when volatile artifacts like memory or process state are required. In these cases, approved forensic tools are deployed within the affected virtual machines or containers to capture data not otherwise accessible. For example, a memory dump tool might be installed to preserve encryption keys or identify in-memory malware. While effective, agent-based methods risk altering the system state and must therefore be carefully logged and justified. Investigators must balance the need for deeper evidence with the risk of introducing noise. In cloud environments, these methods are generally reserved for infrastructure-as-a-service models, where customers retain sufficient control and are often guided by pre-approved runbooks to maintain defensibility. Evidence packaging ensures that acquired data remains usable, protected, and verifiable over the long term. Artifacts are stored in write-once-read-many 8W-worm repositories, which prevent alteration while still allowing retrieval. Metadata such as timestamps, source identifiers, and cryptographic hashes accompany each artifact to prove provenance. For example, a disk snapshot might be packaged with SHA-256 digests, collection notes, and chain of custody forms. Packaging also includes access controls to restrict who can view or copy evidence, ensuring confidentiality. Without disciplined packaging, evidence risks being tampered with, misplaced, or rendered inadmissible. By treating packaging as part of the forensic process rather than an afterthought, organizations preserve the reliability and credibility of their investigative findings. Specialized forensic container formats, such as the Advanced Forensic Format (AFF), provide structure, compression, and integrity checks for digital evidence. Unlike simple raw image files, AFF and equivalent formats store metadata alongside captured artifacts, making them easier to authenticate and manage. For example, an AFF container may include not only a block image but also collection logs, tool versions, and embedded hash values. Compression helps reduce storage costs, which is particularly important when handling large cloud volumes or multi-terabyte datasets. Integrity checks ensure that any attempt to alter the container is immediately detectable. Using standardized formats also enhances interoperability across forensic tools, making collaboration among investigators and external experts more seamless. Timeline analysis is a cornerstone of forensic interpretation, particularly in distributed cloud environments. By correlating logs, file timestamps, and traces, investigators reconstruct attacker activity step by step. For example, a timeline might show a suspicious login event, followed by privilege escalation, mass data reads, and eventual deletion of logs. When visualized, these sequences expose tactics such as lateral movement or persistence attempts. In the cloud, timelines often combine control plane and data plane evidence to capture both configuration changes and operational activity. Because providers timestamp artifacts consistently when NTP is enforced, timelines can be highly precise. This analysis transforms scattered data into coherent narratives, enabling investigators to demonstrate causality and intent with clarity. Key custody reviews address one of the most sensitive aspects of cloud forensics: decryptability of captured data. Many workloads rely on provider-managed or customer-managed encryption keys, and investigators must determine whether those keys are accessible for analysis. A review includes identifying who holds the keys, what policies govern their use, and whether they can be accessed without violating legal or contractual obligations. For example, data encrypted with a customer-managed key in AWS may only be analyzed if the key is still active and appropriately authorized. If keys are lost or deleted, evidence may be irretrievable. Custody reviews, therefore, must be integrated into forensic readiness planning, ensuring that access is possible under controlled and lawful conditions. Log integrity validation ensures that provider and application logs can be trusted as evidence. This process confirms completeness, ordering, and authenticity. For example, investigators check that no gaps exist in CloudTrail event sequences and that log digests match cryptographic signatures provided by the cloud service. Validation also involves correlating log entries across sources to identify discrepancies. Without such assurance, logs could be dismissed as incomplete or manipulated, weakening their evidentiary value. By validating integrity, organizations demonstrate that their logs are reliable records of system activity. Many providers already include features like signed log files or append-only storage, but investigators must explicitly verify and document these protections during acquisition. Artifact examination brings the investigative focus to binaries, scripts, persistence mechanisms, and configuration changes. This step seeks to identify malicious implants, unauthorized modifications, or backdoors. In cloud contexts, this may include examining container images for unauthorized libraries, reviewing startup scripts for persistence attempts, or analyzing configuration snapshots for privilege escalation. Each artifact must be compared against baselines to determine what is normal and what is anomalous. For instance, discovering an unexpected cron job in a virtual machine could signal adversary persistence. Examination is meticulous and detail-oriented, requiring both automated analysis and expert judgment. Findings from this stage often form the basis for remediation recommendations and threat intelligence development. Indicator development transforms forensic findings into actionable security signals. Domains, file hashes, IP addresses, and behavioral patterns extracted from evidence become detection rules and threat hunting queries. For example, if investigators discover a malicious binary within a container, its hash can be distributed to endpoint detection systems. If abnormal API usage is identified, it can be codified into SIEM correlation rules. Indicator development ensures that lessons from one incident are applied to prevent recurrence. In cloud environments, indicators often feed into CSPM, SIEM, and SOAR platforms to provide ongoing monitoring. This closes the loop between forensics and operations, turning static evidence into dynamic defense. Cross-border evidence handling requires attention to data residency, transfer mechanisms, and contractual safeguards. Because cloud data often resides in multiple jurisdictions, exporting evidence to investigators may invoke legal restrictions. For example, European Union privacy laws may prohibit transferring personal data outside approved regions without safeguards. Investigators must rely on contractual clauses, such as standard contractual clauses and provider features that localize evidence. Careless handling can render evidence inadmissible or expose organizations to regulatory penalties. By planning cross-border processes in advance, forensic teams ensure compliance while maintaining access to necessary data. This consideration makes cloud forensics as much about legal strategy as about technical expertise. Tool validation is another discipline that supports evidentiary credibility. Investigators must document the versions, configurations, and verification tests of every tool used. For example, if a memory acquisition tool is deployed inside a virtual machine, its behavior must be tested beforehand to confirm it collects data without introducing corruption. Documentation of validation provides assurance in court that results were not artifacts of faulty tools. This step parallels the scientific principle of reproducibility, ensuring that findings can be trusted and, if necessary, replicated by independent experts. Tool validation adds procedural rigor that elevates forensic work from technical exploration to defensible analysis. Reporting is the stage where forensic findings are communicated in structured form. A report must summarize the scope of investigation, methods used, artifacts collected, and conclusions reached. It should also acknowledge limitations and uncertainties, such as inaccessible logs or encrypted volumes without keys. References to evidence, hashes, and chain of custody entries must be explicit, creating transparency and traceability. For example, a report might detail how snapshots were taken, verified, and analyzed, leading to the conclusion that exfiltration occurred. Well-written reports not only satisfy legal or regulatory needs, but also support internal learning and operational improvements. They represent the final product of the forensic process. Retention policies define how long forensic artifacts and case materials are stored, under what access controls, and how they are eventually destroyed. For example, some regulations may require retaining evidence for years if litigation is possible, while others mandate timely destruction to protect privacy. Retention policies must balance evidentiary needs with storage costs and compliance obligations. They also define who may access evidence and under what approvals. Without clear policies, organizations risk either losing critical evidence prematurely or holding data longer than legally allowed. By codifying retention, organizations ensure consistency, defensibility, and alignment with governance frameworks. Lessons learned from forensic investigations must feed directly back into operations. Findings should update playbooks, refine detection rules, and inform hardening strategies. For example, if a forensic review reveals that key logs were missing, logging configurations should be updated across all environments. If container analysis exposed unpatched libraries, patching pipelines must be strengthened. Lessons learned close the loop between investigation and prevention, ensuring that each incident improves resilience. In the cloud, this iterative cycle is especially important because environments evolve rapidly. Embedding forensic insights into everyday practices ensures that organizations are better prepared for future incidents. For exam preparation, cloud forensics should be understood as a discipline that emphasizes lawful acquisition, evidence integrity, and provider-aware techniques. Key points include the importance of chain of custody, the use of cryptographic hashes for validation, and the adaptation of memory and snapshot acquisition to virtualized platforms. Exam scenarios may ask about distinguishing control plane versus data plane artifacts, or about handling evidence in multi-tenant and cross-border contexts. Understanding the balance between technical rigor and legal admissibility is crucial. The exam relevance lies in demonstrating knowledge of both forensic tools and the governance that makes their results credible. In summary, credible forensic results in the cloud depend on rigorous chain of custody, provider-integrated acquisition methods, and structured analysis techniques. From agentless and agent-based collection to evidence packaging and tool validation, every step must preserve integrity and defensibility. Timelines, key custody, and cross-border handling add layers of complexity unique to cloud environments. Reports, retention, and lessons learned ensure that forensic work translates into accountability and improvement. Ultimately, cloud forensics is not just about uncovering what happened, but about doing so in a way that withstands legal, regulatory, and operational scrutiny, ensuring findings drive both justice and stronger security. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.